Dog Works Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dog Works. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com.
Start your day tomorrow with The Daily Dog with Michelle Forto, the morning podcast on Dog Works Radio. Apple Podcast reviewer Patty Christensen calls it funny, smart, and filled with all the info I want to know about dogs. I love this show. Wake up with The Daily Dog. Available on Dog Works Radio on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your shows.
Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Robert Forto, and you're listening to Mushing Radio here on KVRF 89.7 in the Matsu Valley. RadioFreePalmer.org is our live streaming site, and you can find all of our episodes over on DogWorksRadio.com. Be sure to check us out on all of the iTunes and other feed burner sites such as Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and whatnot. You can also find us over on social media, searching for DogWorks Radio. And calling in from California is our co-host. His name is Alex Stein. Alex, how's it going?
It's going great, Robert. Last time we talked a little bit about gear in sort of an Ask the Musher format, and we're going to roll into a part 2 of that. The one item that is required on most races that we didn't cover last time is where we'll start, and that's a sleeping bag. I know that in most mid-distance and long-distance races, you're required to have certain types of sleeping bags. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, a sleeping bag is a required piece of gear along with that axe, snowshoes, cooker, dog booties, etc. You know, my sleeping bag, Alex, is a very thick minus 40-degree sleeping bag. It's about the size of a couple of large hotel pillows all in a stuff sack. And I can tell you, probably counting on both hands, how many times I've taken that sleeping bag out of my sled and actually used it. It just pretty much stays in the front of my sled and is there just in case of an emergency. And I think that could be said for many mushers. Typically, if we are using our sleeping bags, we're taking them inside of the checkpoints or the lodges or wherever we're staying. But my sleep system typically, Alex, is I'm just kind of leaning up against the back of my sled and throwing a parka over my chest and head and getting a little bit of shut-eye there.
Right. And do mushers ever carry tents, or is that something that is not done?
It's not done on racing, but of course, if we're doing expeditions or just overnight camping trips, that's very common, and we'll use a tent called an Arctic oven. That is a very heavy-duty tent with a small wood stove inside it, and they can get pretty toasty in there. It's nice and warm.
Excellent. And minus 40 is pretty cold. I know that there are sometimes on the race trails, especially the longer races where it does get a little bit colder, but I would think that minus 40 would cover almost all the circumstances you would need where you'd have to be in a sleeping bag.
Yeah, I agree. I think the coldest I've ever recorded on a sled was minus 37, but I know just a couple of years ago on Iditarod it was minus 50 or minus 60 there when they did the Fairbanks route. So it does get quite chilly, and I think you're worried much more about the dogs than you are yourself in terms of being able to stay warm, because you can stay active and, you know, running around on the sled and whatnot where they have to bed down and sleep in the cold as well.
Right. Now, I know a lot of mushers will bring dog jackets, and we've seen in a lot of pictures of dog teams on longer races. Sometimes they're in dog jackets and sometimes they're not. What types of material are those dog jackets usually?
They're typically made out of some type of cordura, very similar to that backpack material that we talked about before in terms of the booties. Typically it's some type of nylon ripstop type material that you would find, like a pair of athletic pants or something like that. And then underneath they will have some type of thick fleece backing that goes up against the dog's fur, and some type of Velcro wrapping to hold them on. And then for the male dogs, they have private guards, if you will. So typically it's fur, sometimes it's a fox or wolf or something like that to cover their private parts so that does not freeze in the very cold weather.
Right, and that's something that that guard for the private parts is something that has been used for a very, very long time in sled dog racing and in just dog sledding.
Right. Yeah, and sort of our rule of thumb is -30 or so is the time that we break out the jackets, but that really depends on the type of dog you have. Do you have a short-haired dog or a houndy type dog? You're going to need those coats more often than those really thick, double-coated dogs like we have, the typical husky-looking sled dog.
Right. And a lot of mushers will carry certain types of foot ointment or topical stuff for their dogs and their dogs' paws. What do you usually use for that?
There's several different types. Most often it's some type of Vaseline type product mixed in with several ointments. I know that there is a massage oil out there that's getting a little bit of controversy out there that some of the mushers are using because it could have a banned substance in it. I know that's sort of a point of contention these days. Some mushers use products like bag balm and things like that you would typically use in a farm environment, and some just use powder in their booties to make sure that their dog's feet are okay.
And what is that for? Is that for if the dog's feet are getting rough from the ice or from the snow, or is there some other thing that's specifically for?
Typically, it's for pads that are becoming cracked or split. You would use a product like that, and you'll use that at the checkpoints on the trail. You will do a massage of the feet and rub that product in to make sure that they stay pliable.
Excellent. Now, I know there's a lot of specialized clothing that mushers wear and bring with them, and some of this is new and has changed recently with modern fabrics and things, but some of it really is just your typical traditional cold weather wear. So let's talk a little bit about that. In terms of clothing, I know that it's very important to have your sort of inner layer, the layer that's closest to your skin, that needs to be able to let you sweat and not pool up the water. What sort of innerwear clothing do you use?
If I do use that, I'll use some type of high-tech fabric. They sell it at Cabela's, and I don't know exactly what that's made out of, but it's just that one two-piece underwear type product that you would see, the long underwear product, and that's what I use. I believe I also have a thicker pair that's some type of heat wicking, cold, sweat wicking gear that I use underneath my clothing.
Right, and then it's very important to have the right kind of parka, and a parka that will balance keeping you warm with being relatively lightweight. So what's the thinking that goes into how you select a parka?
I joke with new mushers all the time and say that back in the early days of Iditarod, they were wearing parkas from Sears and probably a pair of Levi jeans. So yes, products have changed quite a bit over the years, and especially with the parkas, they have some really high-tech parkas from Canada Goose that folks like Lance Mackey you often see wear. I have one of those that I haven't worn very often. It's very thick and very bulky. Most folks will wear some type of parka shell with some type of fleece liner. That's what I typically use. I've used the same parka for 10 years or so from a company out of Minnesota called Wintergreen Outerwear. That's a great parka for me. It's large, but it's not too bulky. I will also use a couple of different types of ruffs. Those are very important if it's very windy out. I have a wolf and otter ruff, and I also have a ruff that's made out of wolverine.
And for people who don't know, the ruff is sort of that fur, almost like a fur collar. It's where the collar of the parka is, and it protects your, I guess it protects your neck and your face primarily.
Yeah, it definitely takes away that wind bite. It really holds in that heat on your face area, and it is truly a lifesaver when you have one of those. And those are often what you will see on a parka. That's what distinguishes kind of a mushing type jacket compared to like a ski jacket or something like that. You wouldn't wear that on the slopes in Aspen.
Right. Do you ever wear face masks or masks specifically designed to cover most of your face and prevent frostbite?
Yes, I have used a fleece bandana type face mask for years. It's probably one of my favorite pieces of gear. I use it every time, whether I'm out doing races or even just chores in the dog yard. It just keeps that warm air in, and of course, as you breathe, that air flows down towards your chest and keeps your body warm as well. So yeah, it's one of my favorite pieces of gear.
And it's very important to keep your hands protected. So a lot of mushers have several different types of gloves or mittens, and they have different fabrics that they use and different ones that they use for when they're on the runners, and they don't necessarily need a lot of access to your fingers, as opposed to when you're in a checkpoint and might need more gloves. What's your glove/mitten strategy?
Well, one thing that I use every day are really inexpensive knit gloves. You can pick them up at the local big box store here at the grocery store up in Alaska. Fred Meyer sells them 2 pairs for $1.50, and we buy them pretty much by the gross in the early fall, and we probably go through 6 or 7 pairs a week. They're just pretty much disposable type knit gloves, and I have used those pretty much all the way down to -20 or so. I'll just add a second pair of those, and that's what I'm using around the kennel and sort of as my liner glove. And then most often I will use a pair of real heavy fleece type work gloves that you can get at your hardware store. That's what I'm wearing over my knit gloves. And then if it's really cold out, I have a pair of beaver mittens. I have a couple of different thicknesses and lengths, to cover as you go up your arm. And I have those if it's really cold out. And it's got to be chilly for me to wear those because they're so bulky.
So the knit gloves, are those wool, or what are they made of?
I think it's just some type of synthetic material, very similar to what you would send your kids to school with. Just I'm sure it's some type of synthetic fabric that, I know it's not fleece, I know it's not wool. It's, just one of those cheap fabrics that you can find at any big box store.
And I've heard a lot of people mention how incredibly warm the beaver mittens are. So is there something about beaver that makes it so warm, or is it just something that over the years has been discovered that this is a particularly good fabric to use? Well,
in terms of rankings of furs, that's pretty much up there. You have your wolverine and your oxen or your buffalo and that sort of thing. Then you go down to the wolf type furs. Then you get into your beaver and your otter. Then you go down into your coyote as you're working your way down. So yeah, they're very warm. And then my beaver mittens have really thick fleece liners inside, which of course keep in the heat as well.
And on the other end of the body, it's also very important to have proper covering for your feet and make sure that your feet stay nice and warm and dry. What sort of footwear do you use, or do most people use?
Footwear is about as varied as there is mushers. You'll see all different types of footwear out there, from the bunny boots, which are those really heavy white boots that you often see. There's some type of military grade type boots that you will see. I have never worn those. I haven't found that they work very well for me. Then you will find the really thick Trans-Alaskan boots from Cabela's. They literally look like the boots that Frankenstein wore in the old horror movies. What I typically use, Alex, are a pair of Neo's overshoes. They're designed to wear over your shoes, as they will. And then I will just wear a couple of pairs of socks and a pair of down booties underneath. A down, it's kind of like a slipper that you would wear underneath, and then I put the booties on top of that. And that has been my system for years, and as I mentioned, it can go way down into the negative 30s, and I will keep my feet warm.
And some people also use special liners in their shoes, liners to, I guess, keep your foot dry and keep your foot warm. Do you use those, or do you mostly just stick with the system you described?
I mostly stick with the system I have described. I know a lot of people use a product called Intuition liners. They are about a couple $100. So for people that are listening, think about just the inside of the boot cost a couple of $100, and then your boots themselves are probably a couple $100 as well. I know back in the day, a lot of folks were still wearing the mukluk type boots. Those don't work as well as you may think, because often they don't have a gripping sole on them, so it makes it difficult to use the brake and the drag and keep your feet on the runners as well.
Now, I have said many times that I'm not sure exactly who invented this, but whoever invented those hand warmer and foot warmer things that you just shake and then they give off heat for 5 or 6 or 8 hours is just an unsung genius. Is that something that you use a lot? Those little hand warmer devices?
I don't use those, but probably most of my peers do. They swear by them. We had a bunch of folks out last weekend that were training for our expedition, and I think every one of those guys and gals were using the hand and feet warmers in their shoes. I just can't keep them warm, and if they do get warm, they get too warm for me, but I tend to run a little hot anyway, so I'm not a fan of those. But what I have found, Alex, that works real well is they have these foot warmers that you can stick onto the bottom of your feet, and so they have some type of sticky fabric on them, and if you stick that on the back of your smartphone, it will not shut down in the cold weather. So that's a nice little tip for folks out there.
Ah, very good. And more people are starting to wear helmets. Not the majority, but used to be maybe 10 years ago you would almost never see someone mushing wearing a helmet. And now it's slowly becoming something that's catching on, especially with some of the mushers who've had sort of high-profile injuries or concussions. Do you see a lot of people starting to wear helmets when you're training or when you're, just watching races?
In sprint mushing, they're much more common than they are in distance mushing. But yeah, as you said, some of the higher profile folks, especially in the Yukon Quest over the last couple of years, who have fallen off their sleds, typically from sleep deprivation. They've been on the trail for 4, 5, 6, 7 days. They haven't slept much, and they literally fall asleep on the sled and then of course fall off and bang their head, and they've had some really bad concussions. I know one person in particular, Brent Sass, swears by a helmet after his crash on the Yukon Quest a few years ago, and you often find him wearing one. I know Cindy Abbott has worn a helmet on Iditarod, and I believe Jan Steves has as well. And there's all different types that people are wearing. They're wearing snowboarding helmets, they're wearing hockey helmets, they're wearing those types of winter helmets that you'd see in the Olympics these days with the harder shell and a little bit of a ventilation system so they can breathe and keep that warm air in and or out.
What about a hat? Do you usually wear a hat when you're mushing, or do you find that your parka and the ruff are enough to keep you warm?
Yep, almost always I'll wear some type of fleece type hat, and then of course if it gets really cold, I have a beaver fur hat, and I even have a seal hat that's lined with otter fur on the inside, and that's if it's really cold. That's if it's about minus 20 or so, that I will use that seal fur hat, because it really keeps the heat in.
Another very important piece of gear that I think is often overlooked is sunglasses, especially when you are out during the day and there is a lot of snow and you get all of that glare. How important are sunglasses to you when you're mushing, and how do you go about selecting the right kind and the right pair?
I wear them almost every time, and mainly it's just to keep that glare from the sun off. More and more people these days are wearing goggles, especially if they wear glasses or contacts, because if it's really cold out there, your contacts can freeze to your eyes, and I think that would be a pretty uncomfortable feeling if you did have that. But the key to any type of glasses is having the no fog type product on them. So you sort of wipe that on to keep that fog off, because as you breathe in, especially if you're wearing a face mask, all of that air goes right up into your glasses, and of course they'll fog up and then they make themselves useless.
Right. And a lot of people, when they're especially on medium and long distance races, will bring electronics, music players, iPods, things like that, so they can listen to music. Is that something that you do when you're out training or when you're running races?
Yeah, almost always I'll have my iPhone not only to listen to music, but also to take pictures and also record all of our training runs. We use an app called Map My Ride, and we use that for speed and distance and trails and all sorts of things. So it's sort of a multi-purpose device with that. I know that iPhones I guess they are now allowed on the Iditarod, but you cannot, I still don't understand the rule 100%. I guess you still cannot make calls from the trail unless it's an emergency, but I don't know. But anyway, yeah, I do use one for a music player, and I use a couple of different types of headphones. I have a wireless set of headphones, Bluetooth type headphones, and I have just your typical wired headphones that also have, the little controls on them, so you can switch the tracks on the music and also turn the volume up and down, which is nice because typically my iPhone is buried deep into my parka or on my bib somewhere, and I can't reach it as I'm going down the trail.
Speaking of things like that, headlamps are vitally important, especially because in the winter there's a lot of racing that's done at night. What can you tell us about the different types of headlamps and how you would select the best one for racing?
There's all different types of headlamps out there. I have two go-to type headlamps. One is called a Princeton Apex Tech. It's just a regular, probably about $100 headlamp that runs off of 4 AA batteries. And it's interesting because the battery pack is actually attached to the headlamp strap and is on the back of your head, which makes it really nice. Then you don't have to fumble with batteries, so it's all a self-contained unit. And I will typically use that headlamp in all of our kennel chores or just really short training runs. When I'm going out for longer runs or in races, I will use a really top-of-the-line headlamp from Lupine. I have a Lupine Betty, which is pretty much the top-of-the-line headlamp out there now. It can literally shine up longer than a football field. And it's interesting because those type of headlamps not only are extremely bright, but they also get extremely warm, so you have to be able to cool those off. And if you have a parka and a ruff and all that stuff on, it can get quite hot. But also, folks always ask, how much do headlamps like that cost? Those are about $1,200 headlamps, and the batteries are about $100 or $150 a pack, and you will need probably 7 or 8 of those that you can recharge on a race like Iditarod. So your lighting system for something like Iditarod is upwards to potentially $2,000.
Wow. A lot of people we've seen wearing these wearable GoPro cameras, and I think the GoPro especially a lot of cameras, but especially the GoPro, have kind of revolutionized the way people photograph dog sledding, especially the way mushers photograph dog sledding. And those, when they first came out, they were relatively expensive, but they've come down considerably. So I think you can get a fairly decent GoPro these days for about $100 or $200.
The newest GoPros, I was just looking at these the other day, they're about $500 for the GoPro 6. And of course, that's the top of the line, just released this year, and it has all the fancy features. But you don't need anything like that. A couple of year old GoPro for, like you said, $100 or $200 will do just fine. We've used the GoPros many times on our training runs, and of course, GoPros have hundreds of different types of attachments. They have attachments that can attach to your chest, attachments that can attach to your head, all sorts of attachments that you can attach to your sled, onto the handlebars, and that sort of thing. What I'm still looking for, Alex, is a way to attach it in front of the lead dog, so you're getting sort of a head-on view of a dog team as they're running towards the GoPro. I haven't figured out a way to do that. I know that they have GoPro attachments where you can attach to the dog's back, so it's sort of like a harness for the GoPro, and that's pretty cool footage, but it becomes pretty shaky because, of course, you're bouncing around the GoPro as the dog is running. So yeah, it's a pretty common thing, and of course that probably wouldn't be nearly as popular if there wasn't the advent of social media for mushing.
Right. I know we're almost out of time, but before we totally run out of time, could you talk a little bit about the types of things that you would include in a repair kit that you were taking with you on a medium or long distance race?
I always carry a Leatherman, not only for repairs, but also for emergencies. And on that Leatherman, it has a pair of pliers so I can undo my carabiners if those freeze up. And, of course, a knife in case I have to cut a dog out of a line or, cut open drop bags or anything like that. So that is my main piece of emergency or repair gear in my kit, and that stays with me all the time. I also always carry a set of waterproof matches just in case I am stranded out somewhere and I have to start a fire, but also know exactly where that is when I pull into a checkpoint and I have to start up my cooker. In my repair kit, I'd also have zip ties and that sort of thing, a set of paracord, and potentially some pieces of wood to fix stanchions and that sort of thing. I remember one year when my daughter ran the Willow Junior 100, they gave them one of those little bags about the size of one of those bank bags, and it was full of repair gear for the kids, and it had screwdrivers and hose clamps and all sorts of stuff that they could use on the trail. And she carried that her whole junior mushing career in her sled. It was sort of that go-to bag, and fortunately she never had to use many of those pieces, but she knew it was always there.
Yeah, and I think, as you said earlier, and as we said last time as well, a lot of this material that you have is sort of emergency equipment. When you're out in the middle of nowhere, when you're out in very unforgiving terrain and weather, you want to make sure that if the worst happens to you, you'll still be able to be okay. And for most people, a lot of this gear we've been talking about, especially the some of the required gear, is stuff that you use rarely, or maybe you will go years or an entire career without using it at all. But the important part is, if you do need it, you're going to want to make sure that you have it.
Of course, and like I said, that repair kit is sort of that emergency kit that you would have in the back of your car. Even if you lived in, a major metropolitan like you do in Los Angeles, I'm sure that a lot of folks have those emergency sets of gear in their car, whether it be flares or, granola bars or whatever in your car. It's that sort of comforting feeling that you would have not only in your sled but also in your car as well. And I think that we should talk about in another episode, Alex, I know we want to do a couple of more of these as we lead up to Iditarod, are trail snacks and trail food for mushers. We get that question all the time. What are you eating on the trail? What do you eat at the checkpoints and that sort of thing? And then talk a little bit about that, and of course talk about what we feed the dogs as well. And with that, there you have it, guys. Part 2 of our gear segment. If you have questions or want to know about other gear that we carry in our sleds or with us on races and camping trips, drop us a line over on dogworksradio.com or any of our social media websites. Just search for Dogworks Radio, and we'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.
Did you know that Alaska Dog Works trains service dogs for those in need throughout North America? Each and every service dog that is trained through the Lead Dog Service Dog Program and Michelle Forto and her team has an individual training plan. We train for autistic, mobility, psychiatric, and PTSD for our soldiers for service work. If you know of someone that may need a service dog, please take a moment and check out Alaska Dog Works on social media and at alaskadogworks.com.
Hi guys, it's Alex. If you're a fan of sled dog sports and the Iditarod, Mushing Radio is the show for you. Each Wednesday we drop a new episode on Dogworks Radio, so be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts from.
If you like our podcast, there are a few things you can do. You can take a couple of minutes and go to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. You can also check out all of our Dogworks Radio sponsors and promotions in our show notes. Another thing you can do is go over to Facebook, like our Facebook page, and one last thing, please tell all of your friends by spreading the word about Dogworks Radio. Thank you so much for listening to us. We really appreciate you.
Dogworks Radio is produced by Robert Forto. Logo art by Angry Squirrel Studios. Dogworks Radio is produced in conjunction with KVRF 89.7 in Palmer, Alaska.
For dog training advice, you can contact Alaska Dog Works at 907-841-1686 or visit their website at alaskadogworks.com. If you have a show idea or would like to be a guest, please contact us by sending an email to live@dogworksradio.com.